Kevin, let me share a quick story about our next guest. One time I was asking her for advice, and she gave me great advice about my career. She always does. And then she sort of wrapped up by looking me up and down, and she said, "But Casey, just remember, no matter what happens, you'll be dead soon." And that's Kara Swisher in a nutshell. Kara Swisher, legendary journalist, chronicler of Silicon Valley. Kevin, on top of all that, she also founded the very podcast feed that you're now listening to.
So today we're talking with Kara Swisher. Kara, of course, is the legendary tech journalist and media entrepreneur. She has covered the tech industry since basically the tech industry existed. She co-founded the publication Recode and the Code Conference. She used to have a podcast called Sway at the New York Times and be a New York Times opinion columnist. And in a bit of internecine podcast drama, there was a little dust up, if you will, when she left the New York Times a few years ago, and the podcast feed that her podcast had used was turned into the Hard Fork feed, the very feed on which our episodes now rest.
That's right. She has feelings about that.
She does.
You may hear them on this very interview.
But that's not why we're interviewing her. Kara, in addition to being one of the great tech journalists, is also a friend and a mentor to both of us. She was actually your landlord for many years.
That's right. Very good landlord. I needed to replace a stove one time. She didn't even blink. She said, just do it right away.
But that's also not the reason we're talking to her. We're talking to her because she has just written a new book called Burn Book. It is a memoir full of stories from her many years covering Silicon Valley and bumping elbows with people like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. It is a barn burner.
Yeah, this is a book where Kara, who is famously productive, kind of slows down and goes back through decades of history, talking to some of the titans of Silicon Valley, and I think chronicles her disillusionment, honestly, with a lot of them. I think she arrived here and was captivated by the promise of the internet, but as the years have gone on, she's become more and more disappointed with the antics of some of the people running this town.
Yeah, totally. So I want to ask her about the book, but I also just think it's a good time to sort of talk to her in general, both to kind of see if we can clear up all this drama around the podcast feeds finally, but also just to get her take as someone who's been around this industry for longer than almost anyone I know, about the state of tech, what's happening in the industry, what's happening in the media and the tech media specifically, and where she thinks we're all heading.
Yeah. And as for me, I'm just trying to get my security deposit back. One note about this conversation, it's very energetic, and I think that energy inspired Kara to drop a lot of F-bombs. So if you were sensitive to that, or with younger listeners, you may want to fast forward through this segment.
Yeah, she used up our whole curse word quota for all of 2024 in a single interview. So just...
rats.
Aw, dang it!
Hi.
Hey, how you doing? You're late,
Good, how
boys.
are you?
What's going on?
I got a book to sell. Let's move.
Oh, this is going exactly how I wanted it to. Kara Swisher, welcome to Hard Fork.
Thank you. I can't believe I'm here. I was refusing. I was banning you people.
It reminds me a little bit of one of those home improvement shows where the homeowner like goes away for the weekend and they come back and their house has been redecorated without their knowledge.
Yes, yes.
So how do you like what we've done with the place?
It's fine. It's brotastic is what I would say. It's brotastic. Let us explain for the people what happened here.
Say what happened.
Okay, before this happened, the New York Times was not going to do this show for Kevin Roose. And I actually called Sam Dolnick and said, "You're a fucking idiot. and if you don't give him the show, I'm going to find him another job and I can do it." Right. And he was like, "Good to talk to you, Kara." You know, he's very gentle. He's a gentleman. And
Sam Dolnick is one of the top editors at the New York Times.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. He's also a family member of the Sulzberg of the clan that owns the. So let's add that in for disclosure. Anyway, so he was like, okay, and I was like, they're so good, people love them, and I sold them. It was dead. That show was dead, and I revived it. I gave it a CPR. Boom. I did that to it, and then. When I left, which I left the relationship. It's fine. I said, please, if you're going to use the feed, tell listeners, don't do a U2. Don't shove the album at them. without their consent. And that's precisely what they did. So you stole my feed after I helped you get the show. And this must stay in. And if Paula, the head of audio at New York Times, tries to take it out, I will find her and I will it will be bad for all of you, let me just say.
Oh,
so
and that is a burn.
Yeah.
That
there
is an
we
official
go. I'm
burn.
just saying,
Yeah, we have gotten the Swisher treatment now.
As always, as Maui says on Moana, you're welcome. So,
well, when we pitched Hard Fork, we were thinking about taglines for the show, and one of them that I had considered was Hard Fork is a show that tries to answer the question, what if Kara Swisher had gone to anger management class?
I'm not angry. Oh, right. I'm scary. That's right. That's what all the men are scared of me. I'm so scared.
You know, Kara, there is there's a question though for me in that story. You know, so you have the story of you call a powerful person and you yell at them and you get what you want. This approach has never once worked for me. Okay, I cannot just call and be angry.
That's
so this is my question. And I think you have often used your you've used sharp elbows to get what you want. And I wonder, did that start from you from the beginning, or did you lean into that over time?
Let's address why it doesn't work with you, because no one believes you can do anything to them, right? So you are what is known in the business as a soft touch. You know,
I'm a bit of a softie, yeah.
Not just a softie, but really squishy is what I would say. And also,
fair enough.
Nobody thinks Casey's going to do anything, right? They don't know what could happen. And they're like, Casey, doubtful. And sorry, Kevin, you too. A little bit less with you. They think you're going to marry.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
They think you're going to marry AI. And it's like, I don't care about his sexual preferences. But you dined out on that one, by the way. Let's just put a pin on that. So,
Kara, I would just like to say, I'm glad we finally invited someone on the podcast who is meaner to Casey than I am.
It's hard to be mean. Well, as people know, and in the interest of full disclosure, Casey was my tenant for many, many years in my cottage in San Francisco. That's not a disclosure. And by the way, he left the place a fucking mess, so I had to charge him the security deposit. But
so he will not be getting his security deposit back.
He did not get it back, and he had to pay more on top of it.
I did.
So.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, you're stepping on my first question here, which is like, Kara, in your book, you talk about your approach to interviewing, which is to start with the most uncomfortable question rather than leaving it for the end. So
that's right.
Let me channel my inner Kara Swisher and ask you, what is the worst thing Casey ever did to your house?
Come on.
Okay. Oh, nice. I like it. He painted a wall in this weird, they had plastic grass all over it. And when we took the plastic grass off, it pulled off, this is an old house from 100 years ago or more. And it pulled off whatever was there. And so I had to have the entire thing redone. And it cost me like $9,000 for this one fucking wall. And it was like crazy.
Kara, let's talk about your book.
Yeah.
Yes,
so,
okay.
Most journalists, if you ask them the question, why did you write this book, they'll give you some fake answer because the real answer is almost always money or attention. But you already have lots of money and you're already famous, so why'd you write a book?
More money and more attention, and it's working out rather nicely. I did not want to write the book. I honestly didn't. And for years, John Karp, who was my first editor on the very first book, he's now running Simon & Schuster, but he was a young editor. I was a young reporter. He's the one that got me to write the first book on AOL because I brought him a different book about this family I had covered called The Halves. It was a retail family because I'd covered retail. And he said, this is not good. I don't like this. What are you doing now? And I started to explain AOL and the early internet to him. And he's like, that's the book. Can you write that book? And he bought the book. And I wrote that book. And he really did change the trajectory. And it was a really good calling card into Silicon Valley when I moved there in 1997. And so I would always get, whenever there was the Yahoo thing with Marissa Mayer or Twitter, there was 100, or Google Books, or any of them, I would always, the first call was to me, like, would you like to write a Google book? I said, I'd rather poke my eyes out. Like, I've already covered it. And same thing with, everything. You guys get these approaches too.
Yeah.
And I just didn't want to write the longer news story of something with little tidbits of Jack Dorsey called Elon Musk, And I like those. I think people should do them, but I have no fucking interest in it. And so I turned them down after, and he came back to me with a literal bag of money, it was a truck of money. I'll be honest with you, it's a lot of money, and it was a 2-book deal. Right?
How much money?
$2 million. So, okay,
Good
there
for
you
you.
go. You don't expect me to say that, do you? Ha ha. So it was for 2 books, and one had to be a Silicon Valley book. The other I could do whatever I wanted, and so I liked that. And so one of the things also that prompted me was Walt Mossberg had a memoir deal, a very pricey one also, and he didn't do it. He decided, he was like, "Fuck this, I'm not doing it." And I thought someone should. That was definitely part of it. Was that Walt was not doing it, and
Right. Walt, your very good friend,
Walt
business partner.
Mossberg.
You guys started All Things D together. The book is dedicated to him, and you said, "I'm gonna write the memoir that maybe Walt chose not to do."
Yeah, a little bit. He would have done a different one because he was so close to Jobs, and he would have focused on that. But when he didn't do it, I thought, well, someone has to do it. And I think I probably had met most of them more than anybody else besides Walt, and so that was really it.
Let me ask you that, like, one of the things that I admire most about you as an entrepreneur is that you are not nostalgic or sentimental. You don't spend a lot of time looking back. You've always been hyper-focused ever since I've known you on what is next. Was it uncomfortable to shift into this mode where you're like, oh, God, I got to think about the last 20 years and all of this stuff?
What the problem was, I'd forgotten a lot. Now, like, as I'm going through this book tour, I'm like, oh, do you remember when Yahoo did news and they hired Banana Republic to that's not in the book. And I'm like, oh, that would have been good to put in there. Like, a lot of memories are coming back. Like, people come up to me, do you remember this? And I look at them, I'm like, I don't even remember you. So no. I did a lot through photos. I looked at a lot of photos, like, oh, I remember that. Like this.
The photos in the book are great.
They're great. I just got sent the one of the chapters opens at Google with this white Russian, this ice sculpture lady with the white Kahlua coming out of the boobs as it was a baby shower. And Ann Wojcicki just sent me that photo. She's like, in case they question you about the Kahlua naked ice lady. I'm like, thank you. I was aware. But I was 2 years late on this book. But actually, it's well timed right now because in the interim, Elon went crazy and AGI, yay! So that, and so I was late, and John was like, Kara, you really need to write this. And I was like, whatever, you can't get the money back. You're not going to take it. That would be ugly, And so then I really got serious about it. And I hired Nell Scoville. I don't know if you know her. She did the Lean In book with Cheryl. And she knew the scene, and she was sort of a book editor, a separate book editor, and I hired her. And she really helped me shape it and remember things. And she was so knowledgeable about these times and is very funny. So she really helped me quite a bit.
Yeah. The book really chronicles, I think, a story of disillusionment for you. You arrived in Silicon Valley, I think, very optimistic. You were very early to realize that the internet was going to be huge at a time when even your and even your editors were saying, Kara, is this going to be that big of a deal? And you said yes. When you sat down to write it, did you think this is going to be the tale of how I sort of became disenchanted, or did that emerge as you were writing it?
No, I was disenchanted, as you know. You know what I mean? And I think I helped you get disenchanted a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I had over the course of time, and it was much earlier. Once I got to All Things D, you could see the sharpness coming in because you couldn't do that at the Wall Street Journal because you're a beat reporter.
Yeah.
And so you could see it, whether it was about Google and trying to take over Yahoo, or Marissa Mayer at Yahoo, or all the CEOs of Yahoo, by the way. Travis Kalanick, we were much sharper. And a lot of it, especially when those valuations went up in the late 90s, you're like, this isn't worth that. This is bullshit. And one thing that I did go back to do, and I was wondering how skeptical I was. I went back and found my very earliest Wall Street Journal articles. I got there in 96 or 7 to the Journal and moved to San Francisco. One of my articles was, here's all their stupid titles, and it's why it's bullshit, essentially. That was one.
Job titles, you mean?
Yeah, job titles. I wrote a whole story about their dumb job titles. And then I wrote a whole story about their dumb clothing choices. And then I wrote a whole story about their dumb food choices. And then the last one I wrote, which I liked a lot, was all the sayings they had that were just performative bullshit. And they put them all in the Wall Street Journal. So I must have started to be annoyed early. And the Journal, I got to say, let me do that. So I was covering the culture too. Like that one about their sayings like, we're changing the world. It's not about power. I was like, that. Here's why that's bullshit. So and then it started to get ugly, I think, around Beacon with Facebook and some of the privacy violations there that seemed malicious. It started to seem malicious.
Yeah, I mean, you have an unusual role in tech journalism these days, which is that you are a chronicler of tech, but you are also someone, as you write in the book, that people in the tech world will call for advice. What should I do about this this company? Should I buy this startup, or should I fire
that
this
only
person,
happened once.
or should I make this strategy decision?
Yeah.
So
It's
how
not
do you
quite
balance
like that.
that?
It's actually not quite like that. It's not like if I had done that, I would have done it for a living, right? It wasn't quite like a very typical thing. That the one you're referencing is the Blue Mountain Arts. I had written a big piece on them, and I got to know them.
This was a
like,
company that made e-cards. Do you remember
e-cards,
those?
right?
Oh, yeah.
Remember they got huge, and I wrote about that phenomena in the journal. And so at the time, Excite had merged with At Home in an unholy whatever the fuck that was, and they were trying to buy it, and a lot of people were trying to buy it. Amazon looked at it and everything else because the traffic was enormous for this Blue Mountain Art site, and they had these really kind of silly, very saccharine cards that you sent, but it was big. The traffic was enormous, and everyone was buying traffic then. And Excite at Home, it was George Bell, remember him, was going to pay for this. And the woman who started with her husband called me, and she was very innocent. She wasn't like most of the Silicon Valley people. They lived in Colorado. They were hippies, and she's like, Kara, I've just been offered $600 million for this company. And I was like, what? That's a news story. Thank you for that. And she wasn't off the record or anything else.
Yeah.
And she said, what should I do? And I was like, okay, this isn't going to be a news story now. I'm going to write it. Thank you. But let me tell you, and I did right away. And I said, but my only advice to you is get cash, because the jig is friggin' up if they're offering you $600 million. Personally,
Right.
and I only did it for her because she was so unsophisticated in that regard. And I said, do not take their stock. Do not. And that was, I guess, my big, and I didn't get a vig for it in any way whatsoever.
Right.
And then another time when I was with Steve Jobs, after Ping came out. Do you remember Ping, their social network?
This was Apple's attempt to launch a social network.
Yeah, it's the only time they followed a trend, really. They're not big followers of trends in a lot of ways. And so they were not a social networking company, but they did it, this Ping thing. And it was focused on music, I think, if I recall.
Right.
And Steve Jobs had introduced it, and he had Chris Martin sing, from Coldplay. And he came out, and when he came out, he'd come out into the demo room, right? And he saw me, and Walt wasn't there, so he had to talk to me, I guess. I was like his second choice, or fifth, really. And he comes over and he goes, what did you think of Pink? And I said, oh, that sucks. It sucks. It just sucks. And he's like, it does. Like, he knew it. Like, he was like mad at himself for agreeing, right? And I said, and I also hate Chris Martin. Chris Martin. So maybe that's, affecting me. I can't stand Coldplay. They're so whiny. And he's like, he's a very good friend of mine. I'm like, oh, sorry. Like, apologies, but he still sucks. And so was that advice? I didn't think he closed it down because I said it sucks, but he knew it already.
Well, so that brings up one of the most interesting dynamics in your career to me, which is that so many of the indelible moments that you've created as a journalist have been live on stage with folks like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Elon Musk. And there's this real tension where you are really tough on them on stage, and also you have to get them to show up.
Yeah.
So, what was your understanding over the years of why they showed up?
Well, Mark Andreessen called it Stockholm Syndrome, but I don't believe that. I think in the case of Jobs, he wanted that. He was tired. He didn't like talking points. He really didn't. He kind of, it's that scene from A Few Good Men. He wanted to tell me he pulled the code red. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. Or that he ordered the code red. A lot of them are tired of it, like in a lot of ways, and they want to have a real discussion, and they want you to see them. Part of it's probably seeing if they could best me or Walt in that case for those many years. The other was it had a sense of event, right? Everybody was there, and so they had to be there. And to be there, they had to be on those chairs, right? And one of the things we did, which I think was unusual, and when we first did it, I'm not going to say the New York Times said that it was like, ethically compromised and then went right ahead and did it themselves. But they did. They wrote a piece about it. And we were like, what's the difference between doing an interview and putting it in the pages and selling advertising against it and what we were doing, which was doing live journalism? That's how we looked at it. And one thing we did which was very clear, including for Jobs, is we didn't give them any questions in advance. A lot of those conferences had done that. We didn't make any agreements. We also got them to sign in advance the agreement to let us use the video and everything else. And the only person at one point, Jobs was like, I'm not signing it. right before that was the only one. And I think Walt said to him, he goes, okay, we're just going to say that to people on stage that you aren't going to be able to see it. And then he signed it, right? And so I don't know. I just feel like they just wanted to mix it up. I think it was fun. It was also super fun, right? Like whatever.
Kara, I was really charmed by your book which I read because I know you, and it felt like peering directly into your brain. It has gotten some criticism.
I know, from the New York Times. My wife gave me my sources. That was a nice piece. I had
this
met
was one
her.
of the criticisms in the Times Review was that you'd been married to.
But it's not a criticism. It's an inaccurate statement. I was a reporter 7 years before I met her. Why would you put that in?
We should just explain. Your ex-wife was an executive at Google for many years.
Years later, after I started.
Yes, and this was a line in I would say an otherwise pretty even-handed review, but it did call attention to the fact that you'd been married. So that you'd been married to a Google executive. We know that this was not how you got your scoops, but this is a criticism that's out there. But I think the criticism that I wanted to ask you about is...
I'm going to put a pin in that for you because, one, I was a tech reporter before I met her. Why would you put a sentence like that? And secondly, she never leaked to me. No one called me to ask me if she was a leaker to me. So that was inaccurate. And it was also an insult to her. She was at Planet Out. That's really going to give me a real up for the tech people. The second part of it was they liked me because I was a tech entrepreneur like them. I was at the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post for 10 years before that. So what happened? Did they go in a time machine and know I was going to be an entrepreneur? That was all, let me just say, inaccurate and should be corrected. But that's fine. Am I close to them? Do I do access journalism? Right. That's
the thing I want to ask you about, because I think you do write in the book about becoming, as you put it, too much a creature of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And this is also something that has been a criticism that has been made of the book and of your career and the careers of other journalists who do the kind of journalism you do, is that you're too sympathetic. You're too close to these people. You can't see their flaws accurately, and you have blind spots. So what do you make of that?
This is endless bullshit. I'm sorry. Like, if you go back, I was literally looking at that review. I was like, oh, you started covering in 2009. You didn't read my stories about Google getting too monopolistic. You didn't read our stories about Uber. They're like, until 2020, she didn't realize it. I wrote 40 columns for the New York Times, the first of which is called The Tech People Digital Arms Dealers. Oh, that's real nice. I'm sorry, it's not true. You have to have a level when you're a beat reporter. This is absolutely true. And you can't do this at the Wall Street Journal. When I'm writing a news story, I can't say those assholes. I can't say that, right? The minute I got to All Things D, that changed drastically. Peter Kafka strafed these people. All our reporters did incredibly tough stories. And at the same time, and I think we modeled it on Walt Mossberg, is some things he liked, some things he didn't like, right? And so you can say that about political reporters, everyone else. Oh, access. Well, look at the content. Actually, I got Scott Thompson fired because of his resume thing. That was years before.
Former CEO of Yahoo.
Yeah, I mean, Carol Bartz. Like, I'm sorry, young man, you just got here, right? I'm sorry you didn't notice. So that was another error, by the way, in that piece. It was full of like ridiculous factual errors. You can have the opinion about access journalism. I don't think it holds water here. And there is an element of any beat where you have to relatively get along with them. But if you make no promises to them, and if I like something, I like something, it does center around Elon. I think that's where it centers, in that I liked him. And I thought he was, compared to all these other people who were doing, I mean, I'm making a joke this week. It's like all these people came to you, and you know this, Kevin, and they had like digital dry cleaning services. You know, after like 20 of those, you're like, stop, kill me now, kill me fucking now. And so I wasn't interested in these people, or else they'd find a company, they'd become venture capitalists, and then they'd bring you the dopiest, stupidest idea, which I ended up calling assisted living for millennial companies, right? and that was tiresome. And then when you met Elon, he was doing cars, he was doing rockets, he was doing really cool stuff. And I give it to him. Slow clap for him on all those things. And so I did like what he was doing. I did encourage that kind of entrepreneurship, right? I thought that was great. And so I did get along with him, and I'm sorry, he changed. And in the book, I say that I said, I didn't misjudge him. He wasn't like that. He changed. And then the minute he changed, I changed. So I don't know what to tell you. Like, he wasn't like that. You knew him back then. Casey, you knew him.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah. Yes, he absolutely changed. You're getting at something else that really interests me, though, Kara, which is I think part of being a good tech journalist is not just delivering a moral judgment on every bad thing that happens in Silicon Valley. It's also being open to new ideas. It's also
Right.
believing that technology can
My
improve
point.
people's lives.
Right.
Like, and we've had conversations in the past where you have said to me that you think that that is important too, that kind of sense of openness. Like, how have you tried to balance those two things in your mind?
Well, I think you've gotten more critical in a good way, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
enthusiastic too, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, and so are you,
Yeah.
Kevin. And it's interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things on the last, let me finish that part, is that if you had
Yeah.
to pick the person who was a slavish fanboy to tech people and an access journalist, I don't know. I might look over the 43 covers of Fortune magazine over the many years, where it was like all up and to the right. And then, of course, they slapped them later. So I wouldn't be the one I would pick for access journalism. Honestly,
Yeah.
that's the thing. But I just represent things to people, I guess. I must represent them.
Well, in other look, there is no doubt in my mind. You've written plenty of criticism, but also like you do kind of have to be like. I think most people don't go into technology journalism if they don't think that it has the possibility to do good things for
Correct.
people.
Which I say from the beginning of the book. And one of the things that it did replace, I think everyone was too. Aren't they? Look at your beautiful big brain, Mr. Gates. When I got there, that was the way it covered it, right? And I think there was sort of fanboys. The second part that happened was then, and I think we led the way at All Things Tea for sure. It got too snarky, right? It was everything sucked, and I'm like, everything doesn't suck. And the minute you say that, you're their friend. I'm not their friend. I just think, I don't know, some of it's cool. Like even crypto, like I was like, this seems interesting. And so you have to be open.
This gets to a criticism that I'm sure all three of us hear from people in the tech industry, which is that the media has become too critical of tech, that they can't see the good, that they're sort of overcorrecting for maybe a decade of too positive coverage, blaming them for getting Donald Trump elected or ruining democracy or whatever, and that they are sort of becoming the scapegoat for all of society's problems. What do you make of that?
I think to an extent that's a little bit true, but it's also true that they actually did do damage. Like, come on, stop it. Like they're not exact. They didn't cause the riot at, not the riot. It's not a riot. It was the insurrection on January 6th. But they were certainly handmaidens to sedition, weren't they? Like, come on, stop it. You can trace that so quickly. Same thing that's going on. They don't want to take any responsibility. They resist. And now, as you know, the victim mentality, the industrial grievance complex among these people. When Mark Andreessen wrote that ridiculous techno-optimist, it's you're for us or against us. I'm like, oh my God. And, the whole, like, when Elon goes on about the man, I'm like, you're the man, you man. Like, that's the kind of stuff. So, no, I don't. I think to an extent, yes, when it's instantly, Mark Zuckerberg is villainous. I don't consider him villainous. I don't. I don't. But is he responsible? And the way you do that is, say, that interview I did with him about Holocaust deniers. That's how you show it. Like, I think he's just ill-equipped in that regard. I don't think he sits in his house and pets a white cat and goes, what shall I do to end humanity now? And I do think there's a little bit of that, especially among younger reporters, that they have to get people. I don't think, and there's people I like. I had a whole chapter. I think Mark Cuban's journey has been really interesting. But we all get that. We all get that because it's our fault. As we have decreasing power, it's all our fault. Really? Like, Walt Mossberg used to be able to make and break companies. We cannot. None of us, even collectively, if we put our little, laser rays together, couldn't do it.
Right. So last question. We have to ask about this huge scandal that just broke today.
Yeah.
Amazon has been flooded by copies of books that are pretending to be Burn Book, but are not Burn Book. They're using generative AI to create versions of your face, like wearing your signature aviators.
Not
what
always.
Is your
Did you see the
response?
Femi one?
Yeah.
Did you see the Femi one?
It's to me. I prefer more butch Kara, but all versions of Kara are beautiful.
No, these versions are not. This is the versions my mother wants to happen. Right? This is like my mother's like. This is great. There's one. This is one title: Text Queen Bee with a Sting by Barbara E. Frey. And then there's another one. They're crazy. So this is not a new thing with me, but it's they wrote it on 404, which I think. Yeah. So I was just with Savannah Guthrie, and she's written this book about faith and God, right? And it's a bestseller. And they created workbooks that go with the book. Savannah has nothing to do with these workbooks. And they're doing it with me. So there's all these Kara books. So I, of course, put them all together. And I sent Annie Jassy a note and said, what the fuck? You're costing me money, sir.
The CEO of Amazon.
Yes. So I literally, I was like, what the fuck? Get these down.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing? These are, it's as if I was like the head of Gucci and there's all these knockoffs, right? Or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
It's not unsimilar, but it's AI generated, clearly.
And just to make a very Kara Swisher point, I think it's been obvious that this was going to happen for a while, and the platforms have not taken enough steps to stop it, right?
Nothing. So I want
Kara,
you to
do we have
find
time
out
for two
why.
more questions?
Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Number one, very commonly people ask me, who know that we're friends, will ask me, like, is Kara Swisher really like that? Like, is she really like that? When the cameras are off, when the mics are off, you know, what is she really like? And I always tell them, like, there is no off switch on Kara. She is Kara wherever she is, in whatever context. And I think that's one thing that's really consistent throughout your entire book is that, you know, this is not an act. This is who you are, this tough persona, this very candid, very blunt person.
Yeah.
And I just want to know, like, how'd you get that way?
I was that way from when I was a kid. I honestly, maybe my dad dying, I don't know. When I was born, I was called Tempesta. So I kind of feel like it's kind of genetic in some fashion. So I don't know. I was one of these people, and maybe because I was gay and nobody liked gay people and I didn't understand that. I was like, I'm great. What are you talking about? I think I just was like this. When I was in school, when I walked out of the class, I was like, I read this. Not going to read. I'm not going to waste my fucking time here with you people. And I think I was 4. I was like, I've already read it. Let's move along. And so I was always like that. And it's sort of my journey to becoming Larry David, right? And now I find myself saying lots of things out loud. I'm like, no, what are you doing? What's going on here? Like, what's with that? And so, so I say that a lot in a lot of things I do. I don't know why I'm like I'm not. Though one of the things I think you must stress to people, I'm actually not mean. Like that's a very sexist thing with people. I think most people are often they go 2 things. I thought you were taller. Which I'm very short, and I thought you were mean, but you're very nice, and I can be very polite, and I'm straightforward.
The thing,
is what I am.
The thing about you that people don't see is that you are so loyal to all the people who work for you. You truly are. You take time to mentor. You identify people who you think could be doing better than they are, and you just proactively go out and help them. I have been a huge beneficiary of that. I truly can never thank you enough for that. But like that is the one thing that doesn't come across in the podcast on the persona is that behind the scenes you are helping a lot of people.
Thank you. That's
so. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if that hurts your rep a little bit, but I did want to say that.
I won't demand an apology from both of you at the end of this. And
we didn't have anything to do with the feed.
I know you didn't, but you know what? You could have stood up for the kid. You could have done, I am Spartacus. That's what you could have done.
All right, last question,
I
Kara.
am Spartacus. Say it. I am Spartacus. Just once for your uber lords up there at the New York Times. Let me just say one more thing about that.
Yes.
One thing that does bother me, and especially around women, and it's a big issue in tech and everywhere else, is a lot of the questions, some of the questions I'm getting on the podcast, and it's always from men. I'm sorry to tell you this, although Savannah kind of did. But how are you so confident? Like, or the word uncommon confidence. It's ridiculous. Like, the fact that women have to sort of excuse themselves constantly is an exhausting thing for them and everybody else. And so one of the things I hate, that's where I get really mad. And that makes me furious. And I sort of pop off when that happens. So
yeah. Last question. In your book, you write about what I would consider the sort of like last generation of great tech founders and entrepreneurs, the Steve Jobses, the Mark Zuckerberg, the Bill Gates, these people who we've been sort of living with now for decades and sort of using the products and the services that they've built. We're now in this sort of weird new era in Silicon Valley where a lot of those companies look sort of aging and sort of maybe past their prime. And you have now this big AI boom and a new crop of startups that has got everyone excited and terrified that are raising huge gobs of money and trying to transform entire industries. Do you think today's generation of young tech founders have learned the lessons from watching the previous one?
They'll probably disappoint me once again in this long relationship. But I do think they're more thoughtful. I find a lot of them much more thoughtful and very aware. Just the way when you talk to young people about uses of social media. I think the craziest people are 30 to 50. not the younger people. My sons are not like, they're like, oh, that's stupid, mom. Or, you know what I mean? Like my older sons. My younger kids only are on, they just have Frozen on autoplay. That's their whole experience with tech. But I think they're smarter than you think, right? And they're aware of the dangers. I think they're more concerned with bigger issues and more important issues. There's not the stupidity, right? There's not the sort of, and arrogance that you get. That seems to be a little bit of starched out of the system. I think, maybe I'm being wrong, but I do feel that some of their businesses make sense to me. I'm like, okay, yeah, I got this. Insurance, AI, like they explain it to me and I'm not like, oh my God, I want to like poke my eye out, the kind of thing. That's one thing. They will say, like a Sam Altman, who I've actually known since he was like 19, they will say there are dangers. They never did that. You know that, right? Everything is up to the right. It's so great. We're here to stay. I don't get that. I couldn't write that same Wall Street Journal article, which is stupid things they say. We're going to change the world. Like, you're not. You would. And that's why the very first line of the book is, so it was capitalism after all. And I am of a firm believer that it is. And they are aware of that. And so, yeah, I have a little more hope, especially around climate change tech and some of this AI stuff. I'm not as scared of AI as everyone else is, although I'm a Terminator aficionado, so which is kind of interesting. But I think I don't like the techno optimists. I really don't like them. But I really don't like the ones that are like, it's the end times, right? During the open AI thing, someone close to the board that was the decelerationist literally called me and said, if we don't work now, humanity is doomed. And I'm like, you're just as bad as fucking Elon Musk, who said the same thing to me. If Tesla doesn't survive, humanity is doomed. You ridiculous fucking narcissists. Like, sorry. It's going to be an asteroid or the sun's going to explode, but it's not because of you. And so I don't know. Do you guys? Do you feel?
I think you've hit on something important, which is that the new generation has wised up. They have taken the lesson of the past generation and they've updated their language. But at the same time, like, they are being quite grandiose and they do talk about terms of existential risk. And so I feel like it always keeps us off balance because we're never sure exactly how seriously to take these people.
I want to see new leaders. I don't want they don't like. I don't think they like the Elon Musk thing. Let me end on this. I just reread the obituary. Mona Simpson, who was Steve Jobs' sister, who he met into adulthood because he hadn't known her. You got to go back and read that. It was really a remarkable thing. He is so different. I know he's mean. Today he looks like a really thoughtful, interesting person. He knew poetry. He knew differences. He understood risks. He didn't shy away from that. Even though he did the reality distortion field, it was about the products. It wasn't around the world. Can you imagine like Tim Cook going, this is what I think of Ukraine, everybody, right? Like, he wouldn't, because he's not an asshole, like, kind of things. And so I really urge people to read that obituary, the eulogy that his sister, Mona Simpson, did. It's in the New York Times, actually. It's wonderful. Because there was a different time. And I'm hoping the young people do embrace the more thoughtful approach versus this ridiculous reductionist, us or them, the man's, the hateful stuff. It's hateful is what it is. That's not a vision of the future. It's dystopian. It's the guy in Total Recall who ran Mars. Fuck that guy, right? Right. So I have hopes. I'm still in love. Not with you two, but yes, in love.
Well, she had to get in one last burn on her way out.
Yeah, exactly.
I like
Kara,
you guys.
Thank you for coming.
Can I just say, you guys have done a nice job with my feed and grown it, and you created a beautiful show. It's a great show. I really like your show, and of course,
thank you.
Anytime you need help, boys, I'm here.
That means a lot. I was just noticing. We had Demis Hassabis on our podcast last week. I noticed he hasn't come on yours. So if you'd like any help booking guests, just let us know.
Actually, Kevin, I wonder who broke that story when it was sold to Google.
I'm just kidding. I'm just messing with you.
Kara
Swisher,
legend. Go look it up. Kara Swisher broke that story. So anyway,
the book is called Burn Book. It's available everywhere you get your books.
There. I will be there after you. I was there before you. I am inevitable. There's no. And by the way,
the Thanos of journalism.
Let me just say, I'm at CNN right now. Do you know I have a show now? I mean, I literally.
Wow.
It's about time you got a break.
Yeah, I know. Right. Exactly.
Kara Swisher, thanks so much for coming.
This was amazing. Thank you, Kara.
Thank you, boys. I appreciate it.
Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.